So good morning and welcome back to episode 3 of our Fireside Chat. So not sure how people are feeling today, whether we've got sore heads from the pubs opening or whether we've got sore muscles from the gyms opening. I managed to do none of those things yesterday. I had my 4-year-old's birthday, so other than eating too much ice cream and stinking a bonfire by cooking marshmallows, that was about the end of my delight. So I will ask the panel your experiences. So please say hello. And how was your Madness Monday or whatever they called it yesterday, Aidan?
No change really, to be honest. I was not in a pub at 1 minute past midnight, and I've not I didn't really need the barbers, so kind of no real change for me, to be honest.
Alex?
Well, a bit like you, Rob, with the kids, you can't do that much, but I did manage to get a haircut first thing. So me and the 3 kids got our hair thankfully cut. So it's a little bit colder out there, it feels like now, but I'm grateful for that at least.
James, I know you're a bit sore.
Yeah, I'm feeling the pain of getting overexcited and turning up to the gym first thing yesterday morning. Went in a bit too excitedly, forgetting that I haven't been to the gym in a year now. My body's reinforcing that mistake by the minute.
Mudassar, what about you?
Yeah, I'm also on the same camp. I had to go have a haircut, so a slight trim, and 2 boys joined me as well. So fortunately, I caught the hairdressers just in time, probably late afternoon, because I think the early rush in the morning pretty much wasn't my cup of tea. So a nice haircut.
Good. And Rowland, you're back from you're back fresh from a couple of weeks off, aren't you? So
yeah, exactly. So for me, unfortunately, yesterday was straight back into a day of trying to catch up on everything that I'd piled up in my absence. Fortunately, as with Aidan, I don't have a big need of the hairdressers, so that wasn't too much of an issue. But my wife and daughter went out and took advantage of the shops being open for the first time in a few months. So that hit the credit card painfully, I suspect, in a while.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think we've all got all that to come. I think my haircut definitely this week will need to happen. There's only a limit to how much stuff I can put in my hair and stick it down. So I think I'll be on that one. Listen, thanks again, team, for joining us. I know we're a little bit light this week, still a few people on leave and things. So to everyone listening, thank you for joining us again. It's great to see the number of live watchers going up week on week. So we've got, I guess we're following, continuing the theme really that we've been touching on for the last couple of weeks around how we've been working, what we're doing, how things are changing, and I guess as we go into the next stage now of relaxation of the rules, what's going to be happening as we start returning to some level of normality around workplace. I think if we look back quickly on last year, almost this time last year we were seeing real kind of urgency and chaos, I guess, not because shops were reopening, but the opposite, because everyone was suddenly stuck at home, and we realized that many organizations weren't equipped to deal with the huge sheer mass of remote working all the time, everyone in the environment. So it was, I think, certainly the first half of last year was all around actually just making sure people can do what they do, and we've got laptops and equipment, and people have got collaboration platforms rolled out and those kind of things. We saw them, I think, towards the back end of last year leading up to Christmas, that kind of calming. I think there was a lot of feeling that things would start to open up. They almost did back in October, but it was still pretty much, I guess, much of the same. I think what we've seen now going into this year in particular is almost an increased level of maturity across many of our customers, where everyone's really thinking about, or more than that now, really executing on their hybrid workplace strategy. We've seen huge increases in meeting rooms being refurbished and rekitted out. Aidan, I know you've had a huge investment in meeting room technology in the last couple of weeks. We're also now seeing, I think, that next stage of what do we need to do better? You know, how do we now ensure that our teams are working with the full momentum of the tools that they've got at their disposal, outside of, I guess, what everyone's almost kind of done before with tools. So, you know we can organise a meeting, we can book an online meeting, everyone can do that, right? Whether it's a Zoom meeting or a Teams meeting or a WebEx, everyone can do that. Everyone knows how to use chat tools. We spend our life in chat. But outside of that, are we really using the power and breadth of the tools that we have at our disposal? Are we doing smart meetings? Are we planning meetings before, during, and after? Are we using the ability to talk inside groups and conversations outside of just one-on-one chats? Are we still reverting to email for the things that we're not quite sure about? Are we collaborating properly on files, or are we still passing things backwards and forwards on email? And have we got a holistic grip on where our data is? How do we protect it? How do we make it accessible but secure? And you know, what do we do about all the other stuff that we haven't really thought about, that's been sitting there on file shares for the last year that no one's been able to or had a desire to access? So bit of a, I guess it sounds a bit chaotic, right? And I think in many cases we're still in that kind of world where we've got this really organized, great front end now to how we work, but we've still got a lot of this unknown underneath. So I kind of wanted to kick off, I guess, with your view really on where you've come from. Again, you know, for the purpose of our viewers, you are working in different sectors. Your organizations are of different sizes. You've got differing levels of I guess, you know, IT maturity and change management maturity. How would you say the last 12 months has panned out from a true collaborative working perspective, from the way that you use the tools and how well it's adopted? Can I start with you, Alex?
Yeah, so we, like everyone, almost overnight, you're working from home. And I think we were in a good-ish situation where we tested it for a couple of days, realized that everyone could just continue to operate. There has, throughout the year, there's been more, it's been harder to actually source hardware and keep, you know, new users or get new users operational than it is to actually keep our existing staff operational. They have adapted remarkably well. The difficulty is now, I think, the hybrid approach of some users being back in the office, but the majority still being at home. I mean, I'm in the office today, first time in a long time. Just walking into the meeting room I'm in, there was someone else in another meeting room, a fully Teams enabled meeting room, but she's on her laptop doing the video call on that. So we as an IT department have more training and awareness to give to our users about how you can use the tools that are already in place, where you can walk into a meeting room and, you know, invite the room in if the room wasn't in the original meeting invite. So you can be more comfortable, you know, you've got a bigger screen to look at as opposed to, you know, on a smaller laptop. So I think training and awareness for us is probably the key for this year. Collaboration is obviously going to be off the scale, and we have to try and start working smarter, I think, with our files. But you know, your intro there just made me realize how much of a long way we've got to go, and how we from our own IT capacity have probably got to pick and choose the projects we try and work on very carefully this year. It's going to be very easy just to continue with it. Oh, we need to replace a server here, or we need to give you a new laptop there. But at the same time, the users are still trying to work, and we have to try and keep up as well. So I think the awareness from myself and my team to try and understand what the users are going to do when they come back into the office, and then be there or try and get one step ahead. But that's going to be very difficult given the, you know, constraints on capacity and just normal day-to-day work we've got to do as well. So it's going to be a challenge over the next 12 months, but it's a good challenge, and I see it as a, you know, as a traditional migration away from, you know, how we would work from on an Exchange server to now being, you know, giving that to Microsoft to do. You know, we've got the same challenge to now try and offload our files and make that easier for the user to collaborate as well. But it's going to be a challenge for the next 12 months for sure.
And do you think that and thank you for that. It's quite inspirational, some of that. And I think it's, and we've always talked about how, you know, the decision making process around IT is shifting, right, from IT being the ones that say what you're going to have and how it's going to work, and this thing looks nice, to actually being driven by the user. Do you think that's accelerated, changed, reduced, increased in the last 12 months? Rowland, what would you say?
Yeah, I think that probably, I think it's in some ways stayed the same, and in some ways it's changed. So I think there are some things definitely where our users have been coming to us saying, well, I can do this on my personal tool or whatever. I don't want to be doing, I can't do it so easily in the corporate tool. And there's definitely things there that have forced us to look into one or two things. We've been continuing to try and push corporate tools in some cases. Classic example of that is probably the way that at the beginning of the pandemic, everybody kept saying it's easier to use Zoom for all of our external calls than it was to use Teams. And there were some things, being able to use breakout rooms, for example, was present in Zoom this time last year, and it wasn't yet in Teams. We've been able to keep pushing people to say, look, Teams keeps adding new bits of functionality and just updating people periodically. So look, this new thing is now available, give it a try. And I think we're pulling more people back into the Teams world, where they'd been using some of the other tools to do bits of collaboration, particularly on some of the sort of video conferencing pieces. And then also, I think we have found new features that we've been able to encourage people to start doing. Things like collaborative document editing is something that's just kind of making its way out a little bit by osmosis almost. We've previously been using a file sharing platform, which isn't a Microsoft one. We use Ignite as our cloud-based file sharing. Now we're in the process of starting to slowly move that across onto SharePoint. And one of the biggest things that's driving that is the fact that when you get a document on SharePoint or in someone's OneDrive or dropped into a Teams conversation, then all of a sudden you can both edit it at the same time. So you can actually have that conversation. You can jump on a Teams call where you can see the other person. You pull the document up, you both edit it at the same time, live on screen. And that's incredibly powerful. And people are just going, wow, this is so cool. It makes us all so much more productive than having one person edit the document from 9 till 11, then email it to the next person who then does something with it. Now, it can be on a file share. It's not like you're actually passing around a file. But the very fact you can collaboratively edit things has been a real winner for us in terms of ability to be more productive. So things like that certainly help. And yeah, some of that is driven by us in IT finding out about things and pushing them out to people and making them aware of it. Other things are individuals in the company finding things out and sharing it with their colleagues and just trickling out. And other things are a request that someone makes saying, look, I can do this in another tool. Is there any way to do it? So
I think that's, again, you raise a really good point there around actually where does education, adoption and change come from? Because, I work with organizations where it's very, almost the mindset is we will do everything we're told to do, and we won't think out. If you tell me that I press button A, press button B, press C, then that's what I'll do. I won't go on a minute. There's an easier way of doing that. I've learned this, or I've read this tip, or I've seen this video of someone else doing something this way around. Versus, in some cases, and you just alluded to that, Rowland, where you've almost got the polar opposite, where you've actually got, look, the tools are there, and users are just so empowered and actually so able to just leverage and learn. And maybe that's because they've been less overlooked, i.e. they can sit at home, they can try things out, they can have a go, no one's going to judge them, kind of thing, because we all get quite precious in our work lives, or whether that's just a culture thing of the way that the workplace encourages people to come on. Because I work with a real mix of different customers that are in both bases, and I think I wish there was a little golden nugget that our sales teams could go and sell, right? That kind of makes customers want to leverage this kind of evergreen technology, where what today is going to be different tomorrow because there are new features. Aidan, how's that? How's that? I mean, you work with quite a diverse bunch of individuals across Govia. How does that manifest itself to you? Oh, I think we might be losing you a little bit. I think we might have internet issues with Aidan. I'll pause you there, Aidan. I'll ask Mudassar the same question.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Shall I?
Yeah, go for it. We'll see if we can get Aidan back properly.
Yeah, no worries. I think Waverton have been through an interesting journey. I think it's fair to say that 2020 really allowed us to transform the way we work and really introduce technology, perhaps that we've been perhaps lacking prior to the pandemic. And to some degree, the overall approach for us has very much been to ensure that our staff leverage and really make use of all the tools that are available to them. And I think last year we took the view that, you know, let's get Teams out. Let's get staff to really leverage Teams as a baseline platform. And I refer to Teams as being our internal digital platform for all. And I think it's fair to say that we used Teams as the equivalent of our existing current portfolio management system, which is the baseline for our front office. But what we've encouraged staff to look at Teams as a digital platform that really leverages all the Microsoft tool sets that are available within our license SKUs. So pushing out voice telephony was one of our key drivers to really drive the collaboration through Teams and remove any additional hardware or telephony requirements, whether that's internal or external collaboration for staff and clients. OneDrive was a big push, and I think it's fair to say OneDrive really allowed us to demonstrate the use of document collaboration. My plan was push out OneDrive and let's get the users to understand the concepts around cloud-based document sharing, cloud-based document editing. And I must say that has really allowed staff within the business units to really drive that aspect of collaboration and productivity within Teams. And once again, pushing Teams as your one-stop shop for effective access. And I suppose the other aspect was very much creating teams within team channels within Teams to allow staff to then share documents with their team and fellow colleagues to then edit and collaborate on documents. So I think OneDrive and a combination of the Teams channels has really allowed us to drive this capability. And I think it was an interesting point that was pointed out a few moments ago around meeting rooms. And I think it's fair to say awareness is probably a key aspect of our strategy this year as well. And it's continuing to reinforce the message around the tool sets available. I mean, all of our meeting rooms are now Teams enabled. And fortunately, the Yearling systems we have do allow WebEx and Zoom meetings now, which is great. So it's again educating users and staff that you can just walk into a meeting room, connect your device to share your screen to the with the Yearling system, or really walk into a meeting room and click join with a single touch of a button. And that's the kind of concept we're trying to push and reinforce. And yeah, this week as well, we've had staff go in to the office. We ran some high-level training sessions a couple of weeks prior, just to reinforce and remind staff of all the capabilities available within the office. And unfortunately, they have begun to use. But I think it's fair to say, as staff begin to adopt more and more of the use case of the meeting rooms, I think there's going to be a lot more requirements. And one of the key requirements that's come our way is, can we have transcriptions that are automated when a meeting has concluded, so that PAs don't need to sit there and write up minutes and notes. So I think it's fair to say that the concept is there. It's just using it and hopefully supporting staff based on further requests.
And we've had a question actually come in from the audience, which is again, I think something that we IT sometimes overlook, but actually is really, really important as we start thinking about this kind of hybrid world. Is so we've touched very much about the tool sets and things. I'm going to come on in a moment to talk about data and legacy applications and things like that. But what about the network? Have you had to make significant changes to the way that your networks are used, the way that users consume their home broadband? Have you looked at paying for users broadband at home, move them to business? Just keen on kind of how that's going to work in this hybrid world if suddenly half our staff are remote. Aidan, do you want to grab that?
I don't mind picking that up. I suppose, if I'm honest, our network infrastructure and our local sort of switches and access points and stuff like that, we haven't done much change in that at all. We went through a network refresh program across the estate 2 or 3 years ago, and I think we're more at the moment looking at where we have our wireless coverage and is it in the right place, and do we need to expand that a bit? It's not so much looking at the I suppose the technology, the speeds, the cabling. If you look at it from our perspective, our major issue is WAN links, to be honest. The actual inside the local sites, the cabling infrastructure we've got. It sounds a bit cynical, but I'd go for one of the latest CAT standards if I was putting something new in. But realistically, once you kind of got to anything above CAT 5e and sort of a gig across it, then that was more than most people needed straight away. I think moving a lot of our file shares and systems like that to the cloud, into SharePoint mainly, then inherently it's the one pipe out of the site, which is the key restricting factor. I've got one site which is sat down there, and until I just found out this morning they put a glass canopy around the station. So Openreach visited about 2 weeks ago. It was good to put the cable in. The facilities have just wrapped it in glass. So we're now into a sudden discussion about how do we manage getting a cable through that without destroying the nice glass canopy which has been fitted in the meantime.
You can't make this stuff up, can you? It's a really interesting point, though, isn't it? Of I certainly, I mean, we've always, we've been in our offices before, and you'll moan about bandwidth and those kind of things, and I think we've moved a lot more stuff into cloud. I mean, we used a mix of products really a couple of years, a year or so ago, where pretty much only Microsoft now. Really, we're Teams, we live and breathe as many do. I think my connectivity is pretty good. I think I suffered the broadband squeeze that most did with the world working from home and kids on YouTube and Xbox and everything else last year. But generally, it's okay. I do wonder what that's like when everyone comes back into offices and your internet connectivity is coming from your office back out to those cloud services, and whether that experience is going to be a better, worse, awful, brilliant as we move. I mean, James, you're no stranger to remote working and multiple locations of various densities of people. How does that pan out for you?
I think, just to touch on that last point, Rob, I think it'll have a big impact depending on people's VPN requirements. For us, we have a need for clinical connectivity, and some of that routes via our internal data centers, which we felt the pinch of probably a year ago, so have addressed by now. But I think overall with this conversation, for us, I guess there's 3 elements. So we've got our corporate connectivity, video collaboration needs. We've also got our clinical outward facing needs in terms of our video consultation. So we've got about 400 to 600 different consulting rooms that we'll use for collaboration or video sessions. And then, of course, we probably run about 40 MDT sessions a day that uses Teams as well. So we've got a number of different flavors that we need to cater to. So we've got a huge corporate workforce, probably about 1,500 to 2,000 heads. We've got 9,000 clinical staff that need or contribute towards video consultations or MDTs, whether that be room-based systems or whether that be in their offices, or, like you said, from home. So we've got a real mix that we need to cater to, that we faced a challenge throughout the last year to be able to come up with an answer for. Now we're at the point where we want to really take advantage of this shift in momentum, where that the law, when you speak of the law of the diffusion of innovation, where you cross that chasm between adoption of the technology, I definitely feel like we're on the other side of that now, and we've got that late majority and those laggards that have had to come on board in terms of video consultations or the use of the tools. and we want to keep riding that wave. So here, what we're planning to do is to try and find that balance between home and hospital working. So creating a space that will house our clinicians for the use of video consultations, so they can have access to EPR locally on site. They can have equipment that's specifically designed to facilitate the best possible experience, not only for them, but also for the patient that's going through this. And we're actually just starting a process now where we're evaluating exactly what that stack looks like for just standard video and collaboration, but also right through our video consultations and to our MDT sessions as well.
Thank you for that. And Rowland, I think you had something to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, I had a few different thoughts on this. I mean, we're a much smaller organisation than some of the others on this call. You know, we've got less than 100 people worldwide, so we've got some different kind of issues to solve them, and a lot of them are driven by the fact that we don't have a big central IT team with lots of time and capability to manage some of these things. We were fortunate enough that we had already upgraded our main link from the office. A couple of years ago, it was running at 100 meg, and we upgraded to a gig last year, a couple of months before all this kicked off. So that was quite a handy upgrade to have made. I think that when people come back into the office, they're going to be working in slightly different ways. So they were very much used to sitting down at a desk, having their desk they sit at where they plug into their docking station, and that's got an Ethernet cable link back, and actually we're now looking to redesign the office a bit and have much more in the way of kind of spaces that people can just sit down and drop into for a few minutes, and on that basis we think there's going to be a lot more people using Wi-Fi than were in the past, rather than cable links. So we're anticipating that that's something we're probably going to have to make an upgrade to, but we can't really make that call yet until we're back in the office and start to see how that's working, not least because it's not just our own space, it's actually everybody else's space as well, because the people below us and above us are not currently in the office, so they're not really using their Wi-Fi, and so we don't know how much interference there's going to be. So we're planning to reassess that later in the year and see where we get to. Sorry, that's actually my doorbell. So I think that my wife's gone out to get something. I have a couple of other brief thoughts, but if I can just quickly go and get the door, I will. Of course,
yeah, that's fine. I'll move the conversation on. No, I mean, really interesting, and I think, you know, infrastructure is obviously key. How people connect and use the data obviously has a massive impact on the user experience, which of course has an impact on adoption and how people perceive it. But if we take that shift forward a little bit then and think about, you know, so I guess outside the core collaboration stack that we've all been familiar with, if we think about, you know, data and data security and I guess identity and security, you know, the other aspect, of course, that has changed dramatically and continues to change dramatically is we've seen obviously a massive increase in the number of attacks, right? And you know, we will all know some that are dear to us based on the sectors that we work in, but you know, there's been an ever increase, you know, risk of attack and data breach and things. People originally playing on and preying on people around COVID, and you know, you must click this link now, otherwise you won't get your furlough pay or whatever that might be. But as we've all adjusted to this working from home environment, where the traditional, you know, unless we're still coming in via an authenticated firewall and VPN every single day, which many of us aren't, how's the security model changed and need to continue to evolve to ensure that, you know, the right people have access to the right data, that we are protecting users' identity, that we do have, you know, almost risk-based conditional access type technologies in place, so that we really do understand who's coming in, what they're accessing, what's the behavior, what is the device. Where do we start with that, and where do you think it needs to move to? I don't know who wants to start me off on that one.
I'll be happy to kick off. So I think we took the view that the bring your own device concept was probably a challenge to maintain and manage the type of devices coming into the organization, and also considering whether that bring your own device meets the prerequisites from a security standpoint prior to connection to the office. So I think that alone was a big concern for us. Fortunately, once again, just fast forwarding, we've obviously removed complete BYOD concept and put forward a standard baseline of Microsoft services across the business. So the baseline for us is there, and what that allows us to do is then leverage the technology within Microsoft to apply the conditional access policies and cloud app security policies to ensure that that device is your sole connection to your corporate resources, whether it's on-prem or whether it's in the cloud. And I think in addition to that, I took the view also to really review how staff connect to the resources, and whether that's using the standard VPN that comes as part of your firewall connection, or whether you leverage Microsoft always on VPN. So from my perspective, it was also understanding how staff would connect into the office for resources. So we took the view that all services should always be connected, so an always on concept. And we've effectively enabled always on VPN for all staff. So from a staff perspective, they're always connected, whether they're connecting to services on prem or whether they're connecting to services within the cloud. Now, from my in addition, from my perspective, I feel that the concept of working from home does pose additional risks naturally, and it's also ensuring that those devices are effectively monitored in the same manner that perhaps you monitor devices internally, and also the access to data is also secure in the same manner. So what we effectively did is actually apply the same principles, and leveraging always on VPN allows us to apply the same baseline across all estates. So whether that's staff using or accessing documents within Teams or SharePoint, you're effectively using the same credentials that you would have done in-house. So from our perspective, controlling and locking access has really been useful, and by leveraging the actual Microsoft cloud stack. But I would say the most important driver behind that has been to really baseline the access, and that's by deploying a Surface and a corporate device across the estate.
So you've very much gone for the managed device, control the endpoint, control the identity, control the data, kind of all points. I guess the other challenge, one of the things that we see a lot is not, and that's quite a common approach. We see, we see organizations either deploying, we see a huge rise in kind of Windows virtual desktop type technologies to support home workers. We've obviously seen, organizations employ en masse, managed devices and use kind of the Intune stack, or whatever they're using to manage those things. I guess the other point is where you get annoying people like me that always give IT a challenge, in that I have more than one device. So I have my corporate managed, hybrid AG joint device that's relatively locked down and controlled. We've just pushed out things like endpoint DLP and some of those things as well to look after things. But I've also got other things that I use. I've got my little Surface Duo that I know, Alex, you've got one that I'm borrowing at the moment. I've got another Surface that I use for just tinkering about on, and I access work stuff from that. Sometimes I work downstairs on a little baby Surface Go and do some work on that. How I'm interested how the rest of you are managing that kind of concept, or differentiating between that. And I think Microsoft call it secure remote work, right? But do you all use that same approach, manage the endpoint, control everything, or do you have more of that risk-based conditional access type approach where you allow the machine learning to kind of judge for itself whether it thinks the user should be able to do what they're trying to do? Who wants to pick up? James, I'm going to pick on you on that, because obviously a lot of the context of what your team access is extremely personal information and confidential information.
So yeah, on that, I mean, we've got a number of security and governance protocols, and our devices, I suppose, maybe kick against some of the freedoms that maybe some of the other guys here today perhaps allow. I can't say for sure, they'll be able to comment. We're heavily locked down. in order to access any patient records, you have to make sure that you're using a smart card so that you're able to identify you. So we have to use one of these that we have to put in physically into a machine that we use. It's quite an archaic way that we have to manage that kind of access, really, to actually have a physical card. There are use cases where we can get around that and we can use virtual smart cards, but they're few and far between, and something that I'd like to see us do more prevalently.
Yeah, that's interesting. I thought, yes, I could imagine you'd have some changes, and that's an interesting point, isn't it? The whole smart card point around identity, and I think we've certainly seen. I mean, I wouldn't even know what my password was now. We've been passwordless for about 6 to 9 months now, which is just amazing. But I know a lot of people get a bit concerned about that kind of. Well, you don't have a password. I don't have a password. Everything is multi-factor challenged for me. But I know other people in our organisation have struggled with that concept, because I think that perception is, well, of course you need a password. Of course you need a password. Aidan, what's your thoughts on that?
I think probably passwordless is probably an aspiration at some point, given the state of passwords and how insecure or secure they may be, depending on how staff use them. Where were we? More than a year ago, we started sort of seeing an uptake in sort of attacks, and one of the major vectors around that was staff who may have had a weak password. So one of the major things we did was multi-factor authentication with conditional access, using the Microsoft Stack. We're EMS licensed, so that covers all of that quite nicely, and that hugely protected our staff. Don't get me wrong, there's a couple of countries on the list which are permanently blocked because of the persistent attacks from them. Other than that, then we whitelist our known company IP addresses to sort of reduce the hassle and overhead if staff are in a site. And then you've obviously got the options around if you're on a known company device. We too went down the always on VPN route. So we know you've got a managed, maintained, secure device which we can manage when you're at home. So we ditched our old VPN solution, went straight after that with device-based VPNs. Don't get me wrong, we still split tunnel, so we throw the traffic out locally across your home internet, unless it needs to go to the corporate network for I don't know, HR, payroll, line of business applications which are hosted on premise still. We do feed it through a cloud proxy, so we do know that we're blocking certain types of content and protecting staff even if they are using an unknown connection at home. I think with the security side of things, if you're not doing MFA and you're just relying on passwords, then you've probably got an issue at the moment in time. You might not think you have, but you do. We went through a whole round of the Azure password protection to drop in known block word lists and kind of put in common passwords and wipe out some sort of legacy passwords staff may have used by default, things like that, to sort of say as and when they change their password, they immediately get hit with the list and blocked from using any of these in future, to sort of make it a bit more complex for when we still have them. And we've enabled, if their devices they're using it are capable of it, then we've enabled things like Windows Hello and biometric on the phones and tablets they have if they want to use it, whether it's face or touch. I don't think I think we're a fair way off passwordless, but I think the huge implementation of MFA now made that a big mindset shift for the company and for the staff, and the majority of staff are on board with it. We allowed them to use text, or we pushed them to the Authenticator app, but we allowed them to use text as well if they wanted to do so. And similarly, we're looking at how we enforce that with most of our staff have a device, a company issued device. There's some subsets of staff who wouldn't have a phone, but then they're likely to have a tablet and a laptop as well. So the ones who don't, then we'll probably look to provision them with a phone as part of the next refresh program we do. So that makes it easier for me, because it's less issues to do with BYOD. I'm not saying that we wouldn't support a level of BYOD, but we'd probably be looking at the application level security as part of the MEM and Intune, to sort of say, I don't really want to manage your personal device. I don't really want to wipe pictures of little Johnny or Alice, because someone will do it at some point. Whereas we do need to protect the company information on the
personal phone. So we're likely to sort of say you have to use Outlook for your email, for example, and encapsulate it that way.
Yeah, so I think again we hit that balance, don't we, between I think most users are happy with the concept of MFA. I mean, you can't bank without using MFA. You probably can't use your Amazon account now without using MFA. But I think where it gets more complicated is that conditional perspective where, and certainly some of the feedback I've had, we're doing some work with a large council at the moment, and the challenge they've had around adoption is firstly they've moved from almost nothing being collaborative to everything being collaborative, and no one ever worked from home, and now everybody, pretty much everyone, works from home. What they've struggled with actually is they've kind of gone probably 2 steps too fast. Yeah, probably 2 steps too fast rather than the wrong steps. And what they've introduced is this concept of, so if you're using a managed device, then you can do all these things. If you want to access certain sites, for example, they're a big heavy SharePoint user, then if you're not in the office, then, or on a VPN to the office, then there's certain sites you can't get to. So they're really taking it to that level of granularity now with access. And if you're using a personal device, then yes, you can authenticate. You can get to certain SharePoint sites, you can't get to others. And the ones you can get to, you only have read access. You can't download anything. You can't. So they've really gone to that extra level. And it has caused an absolute headache for them because whilst they did lots of adoption and change at the beginning, they haven't really done anything since then. So they've just kind of turned on these things thinking it will be quite intuitive for the users, and it's not been. So how do you as we all start having to think more around these things, and collaborative working and hybrid working is going to be the norm now, for many. How do we get that line right between really tightening down the security and making it really risk based and aware and device centric and identity centric, to just having kind of a one rule for all? Alex, any thoughts on that?
We are struggling. Well, I wouldn't say struggling. We are looking at that sort of stuff now, and we have quite a high turnover of staff, and so trying to get them devices, certainly during the last 12 months, has been troublesome at times. So we're not looking at a full BYOD scenario, but we want to give users the option, if we can't get them a machine quickly enough, to be able to at least get access to certain information, certain data. The more information or the more systems we can put online, either behind like a proxy inside Azure or behind the VPN as a last resort, fine. And then we're looking at conditional access, and realistically probably going to restrict all corporate, unless you're on a corporate issued device, you can access everything via the web, but you can't download anything. We have an issue where we can't store CVs of prospective employees for longer than, I think it's 6 weeks or something after the job advert has closed or something like that. So our InfoSec team is saying, well, okay, how can we make sure that users don't store them on their machines? And it's like very difficultly. The systems that we look at, or the recruitment sites that we look at, we try to make sure that they don't allow the ability to download CVs. And that's tricky, to the point where we were looking at policies to run against Exchange mailboxes and say that anything inside this folder, which in theory is where you should store CVs if you're sent one, will be automatically purged every 6 weeks or 6 months. I can't remember what it was now. But that's quite risky in doing it. But then you've got the issue if someone's downloaded a file onto their downloads folder, and how do you access that? Now you can do that through Intune, but we are looking now at probably just sort of starting, because it's getting more and more, of just saying you can only access corporate data through a browser, and we prevent downloading. Teams works in the browser, Outlook's in the browser, SharePoint's in the browser, everything corporate based is there. It's then on us to put other systems that require traditional on-premise architecture or legacy systems and move those into the cloud, or try and put them behind more of a modern style VPN. But it's a challenge for sure. But that's the way that we're thinking of approaching it, before sort of then looking to restrict it or de-restrict it, a little bit further from that.
And of course, that works nicely with, I guess, the application estate that, you know, the core office collaboration estate we're talking about. I mean, we touched on, very briefly touched on DLP, I think, in one of the last sessions, and certainly when we spoke earlier in the week. Obviously, DLP can extend to the endpoint now, which is great. But you know, I guess the other point to touch on before we run out of time today is you know, that's great in the concept of Office 365 and, you know, the data environment that we're in control of. How does that work when we're working with and collaborating with organizations on different meeting platforms, when we're where we're encompassing and challenging, you know, shadow IT and even just legacy systems where we've got file shares all over the place that people can typically access, where we may have less control? How do we get a grip of that level of data and how we, you know, firstly control it, manage it, audit it, secure it? Who wants to volunteer for that one? I'll have a show of hands. Or I'll pick on someone.
I'll quickly start. So we're looking at this now, actually, where we looked at knowledge management briefly last year, and there was a lot of talk about what tool should we use. And I was trying to stress that the tool is probably the last piece, or certainly one of the last pieces you look at. You know, we had to identify our data and our knowledge, and work out who was responsible for ensuring that it was up to date. Because you put it in a new tool, it will be great for 3-4 months, but then you then fall back into the same problem of, you know, who owns that data? Is it updated? Is it IT's responsibility? Is it the department, or whatever it is? So we're taking a slightly two-pronged approach. We've got a internal pilot to start moving our traditional file shares to Teams and try to replicate or not replicate the structure, but look at department, you know, each department essentially becomes a Microsoft team, and that's where they would start to store their data instead of putting it on a traditional file share. But then we're also working with, we've hired a knowledge manager to start to try and identify the other aspects, which is, you know, the whole life cycle of data and who is responsible for managing public data that we need to share to clients as well. And that probably will not be on SharePoint. It could be, but again, you know, there's a lot of emphasis on what tool can we use to do it, and, you know, toying with like things like Project Cortex and try and have one system that can sort of integrate with others at an API level, so that, you know, at least our employees can search from one central resource, but external clients can access the data in a secure manner. But our users are updating it in a known environment as well. So it's a big topic for us this year, knowledge management. But I think identifying your data and working out what you need to transfer to the cloud, because otherwise we're just transferring terabytes of data that's donkey's years old, that we don't actually need in the cloud, that we're then paying for it. And then once people start to understand that, suddenly they don't want to do it, because they realize actually it's a challenge, and it's very easy just to say, hey, IT, move your stuff. Can you just put us in the cloud, please? And it's like, well, yeah, but we facilitate that. I don't want to be the one forever on the hook now looking at permissions in the cloud, and it's then our responsibility, you know, maintaining terabytes of data. So it's a tricky one.
Yeah, and I think as we kind of draw this one together, and I've got one final question to ask you all actually as we kind of wrap it up. But I think you know what's been interesting to generally hear about today, I think, is, you know, we've all got a gripper, I think, around, you know we need to be probably more agile now than we have been ever, right? As we you know, what happened to us last year just kind of happened, right? We had to deal with it. It was kind of mandated. I think as we return to whatever this new world looks like, it's very much going to be, you know, based on, I think, individual choice, you know, corporate choice. Some people won't have a choice because of the type of job that they do, but I think it's definitely going to be a much more fluid environment. I think the risks around security will continue to increase, right? You know, the attack surface has changed dramatically. I think, you know, we're clearly, you know, many of you are looking at the ways in which you do that, from, you know, from full lock and key down to, you know, granular trust and, you know, real, you know, risk-based access and those kind of things. There's definitely a shift. I'm seeing it, you know, onto that, moving more to cloud. I think there's also a big consolidation exercise going on as well around, you know, how do we really leverage the licensing or the tools within the licensing stack that we've got, how do we make sure that we even know what's there? How do we compare what's there between others? And also, and I think this kind of comes back to the final question. And Alex, you kind of reminded me, because you talked about, what was Project Cortex, right? Which is, Microsoft's latest take on, I guess, on real knowledge management within the workplace. But is now what Microsoft have kind of pulled together from a bunch of those projects, of which, of course, Cortex was one of them, into Microsoft Viva, which, of course, is, very much built upon, SharePoint and the Teams experiences and modern apps. I'm keen and I think we're going to do a session on this, I think probably next time, but I'm keen just to get, quickly around the room, your thoughts, experiences so far, ideas around what, Viva may do for you, or do you think it's still too early to tell at this point as to kind of where it fits into your organizations? James, can I start with you, just because I'm intrigued as to, how that could help you or not help you? I'm not sure whether James is having issues there. I'll move on to you, Rowland, because I can't hear James.
I think, to be honest, we haven't even really looked at Viva. We haven't thought about what it could do for us, simply because we don't have enough time to do all the initiatives we're already trying to look at. It could be something that's of interest, but I don't think it's going to be a priority for us in the next few months. I'm going to wait until I see other people saying how amazing it is and someone can really come in and demonstrate us massive things. And we've got through a few of the big projects we're trying to do, like actually shifting more data into Teams and into SharePoint in the first place. I'm sure it's going to be easier to get at that data through Viva or other platforms than it is at the moment when it's all on external file shares.
No, brilliant. Thanks. James, I think you're back.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Right.
It didn't want to unmute. I thought Viva was a really interesting, compelling offer. I felt the same, that there's a large part of me who'd like to see how others fare first, because there's such a slew of different internal collaboration platforms that are available, and seeing it all brought into one place, I think it's a really compelling, exciting offer. As well, in the background, we of course have our N365 agreement, and yet again, licensing will come into play somehow. So look forward to seeing how that develops as a tool set that will or won't be made available to the wider system.
Great. Aidan?
I suppose akin to everyone else, I think Rowland's got a point, and it's like we're in the middle of sort of file servers to SharePoint move. I think Viva Connections is probably the bit we'll look at first, because it's a combination of existing technology packaged together, which is kind of the Yammer, the modern SharePoint communication site. We've got a weird, wonderful issue in that ours was a legacy SharePoint site, which was kind of converted to modern in the way they told you to. So how does that? How will that fare if we throw it into Viva? Will be interesting to have a look at. And I suppose from the perspective of my organisation is very frontline staff focused. I mean, you've kind of got probably twice the number of frontline staff than you have sort of people who have a laptop or a desktop. So it is moving in that direction of sort of consolidating stuff into teams, and I think this helps. I suppose if you look at the what topics, if there's a licensing cost attached, will we buy it? Learning, I've got 3 or 4 little small learning sort of tools and CMS tools. It's going to be an interesting conversation with my L&D team when we look at and sort of see, and I'm fairly sure that none of those are going to integrate with Viva Learning because they're too small. So I think Insights, which was the data sort of driven sort of sourcing thing, we'll see. I think we'll look at Connections first and foremost, because that's the one we'll probably be able to do something with a bit easier first.
I feel like I've probably taken an action. I'm not quite sure what this is. I think I've probably taken an action away from the session, but it feels like there's still, and correct me if I'm wrong, it feels like there's still a little bit of, I guess, confusion, clarity needed as to the, really where Viva can fit, because a lot of it is, products, as you say, that already have existed in some capacity but are going through a bit of an identity change or a refresh. Is that a fair assumption, Alex? Do you think of what Viva is today?
To a degree, yes. The topics thing is what interests me, especially when we're embarking on this knowledge management journey, as a way of bringing information from different sources together and allowing it to be easily searchable and that sort of stuff. Connections for me is mildly interesting. We're looking to add that to Teams. That's a relatively simple thing to do, and it will just hopefully push more people to our modern intranet anyway, which we kind of have as everyone's homepage, but it's more eyeballs on that sort of thing. So it's again front and center in Teams. The learning stuff, a bit like Aidan, we have learning management tools. And again, if we want everything in SharePoint, I'm sure it'll be fine. But you've got to kind of build those kind of portals essentially yourself, kind of thing. And you've got to try and encourage our users to migrate content over to there. So it sort of makes sense in the long term, but these are things that will need many months of investigation, I think, to know whether it's actually useful in the long run. But certainly it's an evolution of what SharePoint already is, and if you're kind of in that world anyway, which we sort of are, it sort of makes sense to at least look at them, I think, and definitely try them out.
And no, and I think you're right. And I think final kind of slightly diverted question before we finish for today is Mudassar, I'll address this one to you, but from the all of these obviously are geared around driving more content into a common place, so it's we can take action on the data. It's searchable. We can get it easier. What does this mean for the way that we handle that data, right? So whether it's about owning third-party data or about just backing up what we've got, right? Because backup is one of those things that comes up every now and then in Office 365. Is do you back it up or do you not? And do you actually rely on the data governance built in with the product? What's the last couple of minutes? What would be your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I think it's a very interesting topic. I think as Aidan referenced, SharePoint migration is a common theme for us as well. We are through that transition, and actually I've also challenged our internal auditors the very same question around data backup. Now, as we know that Microsoft do provide us the retention capabilities within SharePoint, but the true question is that how responsible are they in terms of our data? And I think there is actually a Microsoft service agreement that references something around the service availability. And I think the reference is that they do strive to keep the services up and running. However, all online services may suffer some type of disruption, which I'm sure we will see. But the client is ultimately responsible, as well as the cloud provider. So any data loss that is suffered as a result may not be fully restored. So again, I do ask those that have data in SharePoint and consider backups to look at that point. But that for me is perhaps the question that I need to answer is, based on that, do I consider a third-party backup of my data? Now, is a third party going to give us more functionality and retention capabilities at Microsoft? But if the data has been corrupted in some shape or form, that third-party backup may be a lifesaver to some degree. So from my perspective, interestingly, I'm actually planning to look at this in much more detail as a result of the internal audit. And I think the two use cases that I'm going to put forward to the risk committee is very much around accidental data, and that could be done within the organization, and what's the restoration procedures for that, because there's also an admin overhead that is required. We all know that the version history capabilities are available to staff, but how much of those functions are going to be driven by staff, and how much are they going to be fed back to IT? So there's an element of management of that deletion as well that needs to be considered, and also malicious deletion. And I think that's quite a key aspect to consider as part of the overall data backup strategy, because if somebody does decide to go and delete data, yes, we can rely on SharePoint as a retention, but that third-party backup could be also a fail-safe as well. So no, it's an interesting topic. I'm actually going to present to my risk committee to get their thoughts, and I'm actually underway in terms of creating a paper around this as well.
Brilliant. Well, listen, everybody, we're out of time as always. You know, some great topics, and I think that last one's a bit of a cliffhanger. So I think, you know, I'd ask anyone that's watching this live or watching this on catch up or whatever we call it now in that world to let us know if any of these topics that we've kind of discussed today are ones that you want us to go into more detail around. We'll certainly chat offline, and I'm sure between us we'll have some thoughts on some of those areas that have gone into more detail. But once again, you know, thank you for listening. My panel, thank you so much. You know, you are the stars of this show, and I really appreciate your input, your time, and your wisdom in these. So thank you so much. Enjoy the haircuts, enjoy the gyms, enjoy the beer or wine or whatever your tipple is, and we'll see everyone back here at the same time next month. Thank you.